we realize this is not a very cheap exercise to have to achieve when it comes to companies and all of these things. But let's talk about the key sources of green finance. How can businesses actually determine which funding option best suits their sustainable objectives? Right?
Thanks, Len. Yes, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. And my heart did stop.
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did.
I was just, why is my surname not Khadeli?
No, we'll fix that next.
Yeah, we'll fix it up. Okay.
So at Tshikululu, we like to think of this space as there being a continuum of different types of green sustainability investor. And I think understanding that continuum might help you orientate yourself as someone who's looking for that sort of investment. What drives that investment? And so if you bear with, I know after heavy lunch, think of a continuum from what we'd call on the one end philanthropic type of investing or grant making even, all the way through to your corporate, private sector, capital markets. And we divide that into two core parts. Your finance first sort of investor, that's looking green investor, that's really, they're in it for financial returns. And that's almost half of this continuum. The other half of the continuum we would call your outcomes first investor. And if you need to understand the driver behind that investor before you try and make a pitch for funding from them. So an outcomes first investor is really more interested in those green outcomes. And if you're going to be playing in that space, you need to have the systems and processes in place where you can demonstrate that you are actually achieving green outcomes. In that space, increasingly, we'll probably talk about it later, but to avoid greenwashing. Like we can pretend that we can say we're doing things that are green, but really, we're flying around the world, and first class tickets and chewing up, spewing out carbon, not being very green while we're pretending to be green. So your outcomes first type of investor is really looking for those outcomes. And if you don't have the systems in place and are able to demonstrate the outcomes, don't knock on their door. But you can also be playing in that finance first space, but you might find that the pricing there might be a bit much. And it's that toss up between, you want to be able to do things, your sustainability project or plan. You've got ideas of what it is you want to do. Knocking on the finance first investor, they're going to be charging you market related or close to interest rates or on the finance. Or have, if it's taking equity, they're going to have some very big plans about how they're going to harvest that investment down the line. Much more oriented around finance. Your outcomes investor is much more interested in those green outcomes and can you demonstrate them? Where's the evidence that you're able to do that? And there are different kinds of, unfortunately in South Africa there are very few, but there are those investors that play in the space between finance first and outcomes first. The one I can think of just the top of my head, there are two that I'd like to mention. The Green Outcomes Fund is one that was specifically set up to help achieve green outcomes, but by making grant-making money available to catalytic funding partners. Those are your Edge and your business partners, those organizations that invest in small business and invest in corporate entities, to incentivize them to look for and invest in green projects. So grant funding making it easier to access capital markets, capital in the private sector. But so the Green Outcomes Fund has had some interesting successes. It's small, but it's growing. And that's based on grant funding that's been made available into what otherwise would have been a commercial space, but incentivizing green projects that have green outcomes. The other is, we've been hearing a little bit about the idea of a just transition. And of course, in South Africa, we're fortunate to have some international partners that are putting money aside to fund our just energy transition.
Yeah.
So particularly we're participating in helping the special unit within the presidency to run a just energy transition funding platform, which is making a funding that's been made available. Well, it's not the actual funding, it's more of a matchmaking service. So you can, for profit, can apply for JET funding platform grant funding on that JET funding platform. And the JET team, the JET funding platform team, which is based in the presidency, is actually going about actively matchmaking, looking for those donors that are interested in these sorts of projects. So if your project is registered on that register, you are then, they facilitate bringing your project to the attention of international donors and funders. So just some range of different ways in which one can be thinking about how you pursue green finance.
Great. Okay, thank you, Graeme. Edmond, for your side, what's the role of private-public partnerships as a source of green finance as well?
Great. Now, look, thanks a lot, Leanne, for that question. Look, I just want to pick up from where Graeme left off. He talks about greenwashing. The question that comes, the color green is subjective to some extent. How green is green?
Yeah.
Is it lilac green? Is it emerald green? Now, when it comes to the issue of sustainability, sometimes we tend to abuse that term, sustainability, and even the word green itself. Therefore, we end up finding ourselves with this greenwashing. Now, the key thing about private and public partnerships is that they help us to bring about that balance that brings about, or rather that answers the question, really, what is sustainability? When you have a perfect or a well-working private-public partnership, what you get is a true balance of the three equations or the three variables of people, profit, and planet. We would want to assume that the company, the private, is going for the profit, the government is going for that elusive sustainability that helps the people that they represent. Now, that's very important. So now when you're looking at private partnerships, they tend to unlock some of the largest funds that we need. And you have to understand also that if we are going to make an impact, a big impact on sustainability, we need to run big projects. And private-public partnerships have a tendency of pulling large projects. Like some of the most successful projects in Africa, like the Nuru Solar Power Complex in Morocco, funded at a staggering $9 billion US. Now, no particular individual can just raise that amount of money, but you need a private-public partnership that comes together, brings in various players, and answers the question, is this really sustainable? And if it is, well, you see it working. That's why we want to see those partnerships.
Well, it would be great to see this, but there's a lot of skepticism around green projects. There are, and this is a big problem when it comes to financing. But what role can a traditional advisory service provider play in actually building confidence in investors? I don't know who wants to elaborate on that. Would you like to go for it, Edmond?
Well, look, let me pick that up. Look, I'm a former Deloitte myself. I used to work for Deloitte. I also work for Ernst & Young. And these are part of the big four, the traditional advisory service providers. But what is key about the work that they do is they bring about transparency and accountability as independent observers or independent auditors. Now, when you're having audits that are being done in this manner, they're doing foolproof checkings, and they're giving the assurance to the investors that, look, this thing really will work. I think that's the key thing that they can continue doing going forward, and we need to encourage that. But of course, I do understand that advisory services or firms have been having their own problems. But look, that's just another issue. Yeah. But if we go to the primary core business of an auditor, I think if we work with them and they're working well as independent institutions, we should be getting that comfort that, look, transparency and accountability is preserved.
Yeah.
And from our side, we've definitely seeing the importance of that verification and the auditing. It's becoming more and more important. What we're finding, though, what really helps is if your intention is clear from the outset. So if you're getting into a project, whether you're the one who's going to be funding it or if you're you're running that project, green project, have you defined your green? What is green for you? And have you figured out, we would call it a theory of change, from where you are now, less green, to where you want to be, more green, and what are those indicators and how are you going to measure your progress? Yeah. When that's in place and you've got good governance and accountability around, are you on purpose? Then it's easier for the verifications or the audits to happen because it's against your stated intention.
I also want to, you touched on an example in Morocco, but I think it's important to give some successful examples of green financing and sort of projects, real world example of successful projects that have been financed through this green finance. Would you like to grab it?
I can start with a small example, but what for me is so powerful about this example is how it's funded an ecosystem. So where there's an ecosystem, where you've got existing energies that are green, if I can use the term too much again, but a sound developmental space. And the example I have is a partnership program that was set up in the Matatiele area in the Eastern Cape. It's at the catchment of the water catchment of the Mzimvubu River, a very important water source in South Africa, and that's where the water starts. But it was completely overrun, and they're still working on it with eradicating alien invasive species. So these are trees from Australia and other areas that are basically sucking up all the water.
Yeah.
And that is a major challenge for all the people that live downstream. And that's most of the old Transkei depends on that water source. So the investments that, there was a committee that was set up of users and participants and communities that have been managing and trying to work on how to not only eradicate those invasive species, alien species, but also how to prevent them coming back again. And there are some interesting things that the communities there put in place. And it's kind of tickled me that it's a very interesting little example of that was funded by the Green Outcomes Fund itself, a public-private partnership, that funded a mobile auction house. They're called Meet Naturally. And how does an auction house help with saving water?
Yeah.
Well, bringing the auctions to that community enabled the local communities that keep cattle as their main source of wealth creation to be able to access better prices and manage their herds better. And linked to that, managing their herds better also meant not overgrazing. And because they weren't overgrazing anymore, the wattle and the Port Jackson and others weren't able to take root because the grass was now growing as it should. So there's these knock-on effects, and so it was a small grant in essence. I mean, it's nothing like the Moroccan example, but it's an example of how funding an ecosystem smartly can develop sustainable long-term effects.
Okay, love that. I'm not going to ask you for another example because I think the Moroccan one was lovely, Edmond, but what I want to ask you is how a business can actually align their sustainability goals with investor expectations, because this is, at the end of the day, something where you want to see a long-term green financing in place.
Yeah. I've done a couple of notes on this matter. I think from what we've learned, it's becoming very clear and very apparent that if you really want to be in this space of sustainability, you definitely cannot go at it alone. So the funder needs those who need the funds. No one is an island. But the key three things that I want to bring about, Leanne, is that first of all, whatever it is that you want to be funded on, it has to be progressive but pragmatic. Sometimes we've got all these great ideas. They're very progressive, they sound progressive, but can we really do it? And now when it comes to the actual assessment of this particular project, those questions are going to be asked and we need to answer. And secondly, businesses should focus on the stakeholders. I mentioned earlier that when you're looking at PPPs, there is a balance that we're trying to strike. The planet, the people, and the profit. And along those, there are various stakeholders. Think about the communities that you're going to be going into. Think about the actual profit element. Because honestly speaking, there is no conglomerate that's sitting out there that says, look, I want to go and invest in South Africa because I want to create jobs, and that's it.
Yes, yeah.
It would be nice if they could say that, but look.
Not going to happen.
Yeah. And lastly, I think for me, what we've also picked up is that if it was a cake that we're building, governance is the cake and collaboration is the icing to that cake. Businesses should approach it like that. Good governance and collaborate well.
Interesting. I love that. Okay, time is about to run out here, but Let me sort of ask you guys to wrap up. I mean, I've got more questions, but if there are things that you feel like we haven't touched on, because I know it was a short amount of time, but perhaps policy incentives or regulatory frameworks that need to come about, or whatever the case may be, as you wrap up and finalize this segment for us. So, Graeme, if I can begin with you.
In terms of the policy framework, there's something that I thought I would share here, and it's also echoing the thoughts of public and private, the private and the public working together. There are a lot of disciplines that come from the private sector that we'd love for the public sector to adopt. But when it comes to being able to monitor and evaluate green outcomes, I believe that the Department of Performance Management Evaluation in the presidency is by far away the most advanced when it comes to having the tools and the frameworks already written up and in place to manage the way you monitor and track just energy transition and other green outcomes. So there may actually be some centers of excellence in places you don't expect to find them.
Yeah, amazing. And for you, Edmond, just to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, thank you so much. Look, I think to wrap it up for me, when I'm looking at this question of sustainability, I realize that we've got a lot of players in sustainability. We've got lawyers, we've got engineers, we've got academics, we've got all of those people. And they're doing a fantastic job, Leanne. But the thing that we are all failing to do is communicate why we're doing that.
Yeah.
You see, everyone who's in this room is already converted. They understand that, look, we need to save the planet. And those who don't care about it, the naysayers, the doomsayers, they are not in here. And those are the guys that are sitting in the boardrooms. And when we're now arguing and we're pushing forward such ideas, they tend to kill them with one-liners. We need to strengthen our communication on this question on sustainability.
Yeah.
We haven't yet won. There are 8 billion people on the planet. We still need to keep talking about it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've got a lot more people to reach. We really do. And I hope that this just grows in strength, the strength that this message can get further, and to not the converted to the non-converted. I don't know what the word is for them, but we need to bring them into the room. Guys, thank you. Absolutely. Thank you very, very much for talking to us here on the podium. On the podium. So if you could please give them a round of applause as they make their way down. Thank you, guys. Thank you.